The intake bay smelled like three things that had no business being in the same room: recycled air, something biological that the filtration system was losing an argument with, and a cleaning compound that someone had applied enthusiastically to everything except the floor grates. I noticed all of this before I noticed the aliens. That probably says everything about me that needs saying. There were 41 of us, 41 humans, pulled from 9 different regions of Earth, representing the first cadet class in the history of the Velthari Interstellar Academy to include humans at all. The diplomatic communique had called it a historic integration initiative. My recruitment officer had called it an opportunity. My mother had said nothing, which in our house meant she thought it was a bad idea but had decided not to fight it. I stepped off the transit shuttle with my pack over one shoulder and my bootlace coming undone, and took my first real look at the academy intake hall. It was enormous in the way that made your lungs feel small, ceiling so high it disappeared into filtered light, curved walls of a material that was not metal and not stone, but something that had opinions about both. Cadets from a dozen species moved through processing lanes that curved in spirals rather than straight lines, because straight lines were apparently a human preference that the galaxy had not adopted. I knelt and tied my boot. When I stood up, one of them was looking at me. 7 feet tall, exoskeleton the color of oil on water, iridescent, shifting between blue and green depending on how the light hit it. 4 upper limbs, 2 primary, 2 secondary folded close to the body. Eyes, 5 of them, arranged in a pattern that I had read about in the briefing documents, but that the briefing documents had not adequately prepared me for, all 5 fixed on me with an expression I could not yet read. It said something. The translator bead behind my ear processed it and rendered a word into my language with the particular hesitation of a system that was not sure it had the right equivalent. The word it landed on was freight. Not freight manifest exactly. The translator gave up on nuance and just said freight, and then from the sound the alien made and the way the others around it reacted, I understood it had been a joke, a short one, at our expense. I counted the ones who laughed. 17. I noted which ones laughed longest. 4. I noted their positions in the room and their dominant limbs, and the distance between them. Then I picked up my bag and walked to the processing lane. The cadet in the bunk above mine was named Vel, Korathi species, approximately my height, which I had not expected, with skin that shifted temperature depending on mood, a biological feature Vel had mentioned within the first 10 minutes because, as Vel put it, there was no point pretending the thermostat was not going to be a conversation. Vel watched me unpack with the focused attention of someone waiting for more information before forming a conclusion. I had one change of clothes, a field kit, a water processing tablet case that I had carried since I was 11 and did not intend to stop carrying, a photograph that I put face down in the inside pocket of my bag without looking at it. Vel said, "What's your name?" I said, "Kale." Vel waited. Nothing else came. "Is that all?" Vel said. "Yeah," I said. "You can have more if you want, make something up." Vel stared at me for a long moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. "I'm Vel," Vel said. "I know," I said. "It's on your bunk tag." On the 3rd day during equipment assignment, a cadet knocked my pack off the ledge outside the gear room. It hit the floor, everything in the outer pocket scattered. My field kit, the water tablets, a small wrench I carried out of habit. The laughter came fast, not from everyone, from the ones who had been waiting for something to confirm what they already thought, which is a different thing. I crouched and picked everything up one piece at a time: wrench, water tablets, field kit. I did not look up. Not because I was embarrassed, because I was checking the floor for anything I had missed. When I stood, Vel was there, which I had not expected. "You should be angry," Vel said very quietly. I considered this. "About what?" I said. We were assigned to the same tactics cohort, which meant I ate 3 meals a day at a table where Vel talked, and I ate and occasionally said things that made Vel stop talking for a moment and then start again more carefully. On the sixth day, Vel asked me directly, "Are you scared? Being here, I mean." I put down my fork. I thought about the question the way I thought about most questions, which was as though it were a request for information that deserved an accurate answer rather than a comfortable one. "Of what?" I said. Vel opened their mouth, closed it, opened it again. "The academy," Vel said, "the other cadets, being so far from home." Home was 312 light-years behind me. Home was a border territory that didn't have a name on most maps because cartographers tended to map places where things were stable, and home had never qualified. Home was the smell of dust and the weight of a water container at 1.3 times standard gravity and a house where we kept quiet because noise attracted attention and attention cost things we couldn't afford to lose. "No," I said. Vel looked at me, not the way the others looked at me, with that particular cocktail of amusement and dismissal. Vel looked at me the way someone looks at a shape they keep seeing in different places, unsure whether it is a coincidence or a pattern. "What does scare you?" Vel asked. I picked up my fork again. "Running out of water tablets," I said. Vel laughed. I was not joking, but that was fine. It worked either way. On the eighth day, the lead processing officer posted our cohort assignments with small notes appended to each name. Mine said, "Quiet, no behavioral concerns, minimal social integration, recommend monitoring." I read it, folded the sheet, put it in my bag. Monitoring was fine. I had been monitored my whole life, by things with much better reasons to do it. The note the officer had written for Vel said, "Engaged, communicative, high social aptitude, recommend mentorship role." Vel showed it to me with the expression of someone presenting good news. "Mentorship role," Vel said. "Congratulations," I said. "You're not even a little impressed with yourself. Your note says no behavioral concerns. That's technically good." "Technically," I agreed. "You're the strangest person I've ever met," Vel said. "Right," I said. I meant it as acknowledgement. Vel seemed to take it as something else. Either way, after that, Vel stopped trying to read me the way you read a sign and started watching me the way you watch a road, just to see where it went. That was the closest thing to understanding I had found since arriving. It would do. On the ninth day, I retied my boot 4 times during orientation, not because it kept coming undone, because the knot was wrong. Each time I retied it, I made it marginally better. By the 4th attempt, it was correct. That is the most honest thing I can tell you about who I am. I do not stop until it is correct. I do not announce when it is correct. I just move on to the next thing. The intake bay had smelled like 3 things that had no business being in the same room. By the end of the 9th day, it just smelled like the place I lived. That was enough. Commander Thas stood at the front of the conditioning hall as though the room had been specifically designed around him, which, given that the Velthari had built the academy, was probably not inaccurate. He was older than the other instructors I had seen, with exoskeleton plating that had gone from iridescent to a darker, settled gray, the color of something that had stopped caring whether it was impressive and had moved on to just being effective. He looked at the 41 of us with 4 of his 5 eyes. The 5th was watching the door. "Physical conditioning trials," he said, and the translator bead rendered his voice into something flat and procedural, which I suspected was accurate. "These trials establish baseline capability metrics for all cadets. Results determine track placement, unit assignment, and load-bearing role eligibility." He paused. "The parameters are calibrated to academy standard. Accommodations exist for non-standard physiologies." He said accommodations, the way someone says the word, when they have already decided what category you belong in. I looked at the equipment calibration dial on the load frame across the room. The load frame was a pull-and-carry apparatus. You gripped 2 handles set at shoulder height, lifted the weighted rig, and carried it the length of the conditioning floor. 30 meters. The weight was the variable. Academy standard, the number every Velthari cadet was assessed against, was a number I had read in the intake documentation. The accommodation number, the one that appeared next to the words human physiological category in the footnote of that same document, was less than half of it. I kept looking at the dial. The trials started with the Korathi cadets, because their biological category had the most logistical complexity and Thas preferred to resolve complexity before moving to what he clearly considered the simpler end of the cohort. Vel performed adequately, which Vel reported to me afterward with the tone of someone hopping for more enthusiasm in response. I said good, and meant it, and Vel accepted this. Then the other species cycled through. Each one stepped up, gripped the handles, lifted, carried. The numbers went up on the display board in real time. Big numbers. The kind that made the watching cadets make sounds that the translator rendered as impressed, or as the local equivalent of a low whistle, which apparently was universal. The human cadets went second to last. The first three struggled at the accommodation weight. They were not weak people. One of them, a cadet named Owen from a coastal city that had actual nutrition infrastructure, was probably the most physically developed person in the human intake group. He carried the accommodation weight the full 30 meters, set it down, and stood up straight with the expression of someone who had done a hard thing and knew it. Thas made a mark on his register. From the viewing area, a sound from somewhere in the alien cadet section. The translator did not render it. Some things the translator declined to touch, and the sounds that landed below contempt were usually in that category. Owen heard it, his jaw moved, he walked back to the line. I was next. I stepped up to the load frame. Thas was already reaching for the calibration dial, already moving it toward the accommodation setting with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done this adjustment for every human before me and expected to do it for the one after. I looked at the dial. Looked at him. Can I adjust that? I said. He stopped, 3 of his 5 eyes came to me. Adjust it down. No, I said. He was still for a moment, not confused exactly, more like a man encountering a sentence that was grammatically correct but contextually strange. The accommodation weight exists for. I know what it's for, I said. Silence. Not a short silence. I reached past him, which I understood afterward was probably not the correct protocol, and moved the dial to Academy standard. Full cadet baseline, the number that appeared next to the large species designations in the documentation. The weight stack locked into position. I looked at the handles. They were set for Velthari grip width, which was wider than human grip width by approximately 10 centimeters. I adjusted the handle spacing. Thas watched me do this and said nothing, which I took as permission rather than stunned paralysis, though it may have been both. I gripped the handles. Cold metal, real weight, the kind of weight that asks a question before you lift it. I lifted it. The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something happens that the room was not prepared for. Not sudden silence. Gradual, spreading, moving outward from the load frame like a sound traveling in reverse. I carried it. 30 meters is not a long distance. I know that. But when everything you are carrying is heavier than what was expected of you, 30 meters is a different kind of distance. It is the distance between the thing people decided you were and the thing you actually are, and every step covers some of it. I set it down at the end marker. I stood up straight. Okay, I said, to no one in particular. I walked back to the line. The display board had the number. It was up there with the other numbers. It did not announce itself. It did not need to. Numbers do not perform. They just sit there and mean what they mean. Thas had not moved. I became aware, in my peripheral vision, that he was looking at me with an expression I had not yet seen on a Velthari face. His file of forms was still in his hand. He had not made a mark. The cadet behind me was Owen. Owen looked at me. I looked at him. He gave me a small nod, not congratulatory, not amazed, the nod of someone who had just understood something and was filing it where it belonged. I nodded back. From somewhere in the alien cadet section, nothing. No sound. No translator-rendered commentary. The silence from that direction was a completely different kind of silence from the one that had followed my lift. The first silence was shock. This silence was something quieter and more careful. The silence of 17 cadets who had laughed on day one doing arithmetic they hadn't expected to be doing. Vel appeared at my shoulder after the trials ended. We walked toward the exit corridor without discussing where we were going. After a while, Vel said, "How?" "The Borderlands run 1.3 standard gravity," I said. "I've been hauling water since I was 11. Vel processed this. "You've been training your whole life," Vel said. "I've been getting water my whole life," I said. "It's not the same thing." Vel stopped walking. I stopped too, because stopping when the person next to you stops is a basic social function I had managed to retain despite everything. "You didn't know it would translate," Vel said. I thought about that. I thought about the dial, the number, the distance between what people assumed and what I could carry. "I knew what I'd been lifting," I said. "The gravity did the math." Vel stared at me with the expression that had become familiar over the past 8 days. The recalibrating expression. The one that appeared when I said something that landed in the wrong category. We started walking again. Behind us, I heard Thas speaking to another instructor, low and deliberate, in a register the translator decided not to render. I did not need the translation. Some things you learn to read without language. Tone carries information that words dress up and slow down. His tone said he was asking a question. The kind of question you ask when you have encountered a data point that does not fit your existing model, and you are not sure whether to adjust the data point or the model. In my experience, people took longer to make that choice than you would hope. That was fine. I had time. Owen fell into step on my other side somewhere near the corridor junction. He did not say anything. Neither did I. We walked 3 abreast down the corridor toward the meal hall, Vel on my left, Owen on my right, the display board with its numbers somewhere behind us on a wall that was already getting smaller. Someone in the alien cadet section, passing us in the opposite direction, looked at me. Not with amusement this time. I could not name what it was with exactly. The translator did not help with expressions, but I noted it, filed it where I filed things. We got dinner. I retied my boot under the table. Nobody noticed. That was exactly how I wanted it. The tactics room was shaped like a throat. Oval, narrowing at both ends, the holographic display platform at the center like something the room was trying to swallow. 17 cadets sat in the tiered seating, 3 species, 1 instructor. I sat in the second row, left side, close enough to the display to see the detail, far enough from the instructor's sightline that I was not the first thing he looked at. This was habit, sitting where you could see everything without being the first thing seen. Instructor Davin was Velthari, younger than Thas, with the quick eye movement of someone who had learned to read a room fast and found satisfaction in that skill. He liked teaching. You could tell. The ones who liked teaching moved differently than the ones who were serving out an assignment. They leaned forward. They paused after questions, not because they were being patient, but because they were genuinely interested in what came back. He activated the holographic display. A tactical scenario. 3 factions. 1 resource extraction point on a low-gravity moon. Academy unit caught in the middle position between 2 hostile forces with no clean line of retreat. The simulation was rendered in soft blue light, the units marked in colors that distinguished without being difficult to read. Standard 3-body engagement, Davin said. This scenario has been part of Academy curriculum for 217 years. You've had access to the briefing files for 6 days. I'd like to hear your assessments. I tilted my head at the map. Not consciously. It was the thing I did when something didn't sit straight. My head moved before my brain had finished deciding what was wrong. I looked at the supply lines. Then I looked at Faction B's unit positions. Then I looked at the supply lines again. Oren spoke first. Oren was the top cadet in the senior cohort, which I knew because Vel had told me, and Vel had told me with the specific tone used to convey that I should be impressed. Oren was Velthari, tall even by their standards. The exoskeleton was a clear, almost colorless shade that I had come to understand was associated with high caste designation, though I had not confirmed this and was not certain the confirmation would change anything. Oren stood at the display and walked through the textbook solution with the ease of someone delivering a thing they have said before and have not needed to revise. Tactical withdrawal to secondary elevation, 2/3 of the unit to high ground, 1/3 maintaining a false forward presence to sustain faction engagement at the extraction point. Wait for the two hostile factions to deplete each other's resources. Extract when engagement drops below threshold. It was clean, correctly sequenced, internally consistent. The room gave the sounds of approval. Davin nodded. Strong. The historical success rate for this approach in simulated three-body scenarios is 73%. Anyone see differently? I looked at the supply lines one more time. Then at Faction B. The withdrawal fails, I said. The room turned. Not all at once. In sequence. The cadets closest to me first, then the ones farther back, then Oren, who turned last, with the measured pace of someone who had decided in the half-second before turning that whatever came next was probably not a serious challenge. Davin looked at me. His expression was the one he used when something arrived that he had not scheduled. Cadet Nara, he said. The withdrawal fails, I said again. Not louder, just again. The historical success rate is built on symmetric depletion, I said. Both factions running down at the same rate. That's the assumption the scenario bakes in because the scenario doesn't have a supply line for Faction B, but Faction B's unit positioning is cash and cycle pattern. They're not running down. They're restocking at intervals. The Academy unit on the high ground waits for exhaustion that never comes. Eventually, Faction B breaks from the extraction engagement, reorients, and takes the elevated position. Silence. Davin looked at the map. His head moved in a small, precise motion that I was learning meant he was checking something internally, running numbers, recalculating. Oren said, the scenario parameters don't include. I know, I said. Oren stopped. The scenario parameters don't include supply caching because the scenario was built around symmetric depletion doctrine, I said. But real engagement environments don't agree with doctrine about what they're going to include. If you fight the scenario, you win the scenario. If Faction B has figured out cash-in cycle, you lose the moon. The room was quiet. Davin said, all right, what would you do instead? I stood up. I walked to the holographic display and did what I had not been certain I was allowed to do, which was physically tilt it. I put my hand on the edge of the projection field and shifted the angle. The map tilted. A small sound from Davin, not quite surprise, not quite alarm, something between the two. The tilted angle showed the terrain feature I wanted. A ridge, low on the eastern perimeter of the extraction site, outside the main engagement area. Not tactically attractive. Too exposed on one flank, bad sightlines on the other. The kind of position that looked so unfavorable that the notation next to it in the scenario documentation literally read low-value terrain. You put a unit here, I said. Oren, that position is. Terrible, I said. Yes, that's why it works. I pointed at Faction B's cache positions. Faction B knows the elevation move. They've probably planned against it. They have not planned against a unit in a position so unfavorable that no rational tactical system would recommend it, because rational tactical systems are optimized for the survival of the unit, and this position looks like you're not interested in that. A cadet in the back row said something. The translator gave me Sacrifice. Not sacrifice, I said before the translation had fully finished. Bait. There's a difference. Bait comes home. You position the unit there with the single objective of being visible and wrong. Faction B reorients to address the threat they don't understand, because unknown unit behavior in a bad position reads as a trap or a miscommunication in command, and either way they have to deal with it. While they deal with it, the main unit is not on the high ground. Where is the main unit? Davin said. I pointed. The low ground. The place nobody used for a main force position, because it was low ground, and the axiom about low ground had been in military thinking for as long as military thinking had existed. Here, I said, moving, not holding. The objective isn't to hold a position and wait. The objective is to be somewhere that Faction B cannot predict because Faction B has predicted the scenario you were trained to execute. You fight them with the decision they didn't make, not the one they planned for. The room did not make the approval sounds it had made for Oren. It did something else instead, quieter, the sound of people sitting with something they had not fully processed yet. Oren said, "It's a high-risk approach." Yes, I said. The unit in the low-value terrain position is exposed. Yes, I said. You're asking people to hold a position they know is tactically compromised. I'm asking them to hold it for 40 minutes, I said. After 40 minutes, Faction B has committed to the reorientation, and the main unit has reached an intercept angle that closes their resupply. They don't need to hold the position longer than that. They just need to look like they're planning to. Oren was quiet. Not the quiet of someone who had been defeated, the quiet of someone running calculations. Davin had moved closer to the display. He was looking at the positions I had marked. His head did that small, precise motion again. Where did you learn that approach? Oren asked. Not with hostility, with something closer to the tone Vel used when recalibrating, the tone of something reclassifying. I looked at him. I thought about the answer. The correct answer was long and had geography and gravity and a dead father in it, and none of that belonged in this room right now. Home, I said. I sat down. The holographic display was still tilted. Nobody corrected it. Davin stared at the map for another moment and then straightened up. He said, "We'll run the simulation both ways." He said it to the room, but he was looking at the tilted map. Textbook extraction, then Cadet Nara's approach, full outcome modeling. He pulled up the controls. For the record, he said, almost to himself, still looking at the map, the scenario documentation does not include supply line data for Faction B because the original scenario designers did not use cash and cycle doctrine. It was considered a theoretical tactic. He paused. It has been employed in actual engagements 14 times in the last 60 years, 11 times successfully. He looked at me. I said nothing. The files we teach from, he said, are not always current. That sentence landed in the room and sat there. I heard it for what it was. Not a compliment, not a critique, an acknowledgement, the specific acknowledgement of someone who had just encountered a gap between what they teach and what is true, and was deciding in real time to say so out loud instead of around it. I respected that. I did not say so. The simulation ran. Oren's approach first. The textbook extraction, clean and confident, the units moving in the patterns 217 years of curriculum had refined. It held for 31 minutes. Then Faction B's cash cycle completed its third rotation, and the unit on the high ground found itself looking at a force that had not depleted and had now shifted to address them directly. Simulation ended. Outcome, Academy unit neutralized. Second simulation. My approach. The bait unit in the low-value terrain exposed, looking wrong. The main unit in the low ground moving. Faction B reorienting. The 40-minute window opening. The simulation ran. At minute 38, the intercept angle closed. Faction B's resupply cut. Engagement balance shifted. Simulation ended. Outcome, Academy unit successful extraction, 62% strength. Not a clean win. 62% was not a clean win. 3 out of every 10 cadets in the simulated unit did not make it back. I knew that. I had known that when I described the approach. I had not softened it, and I did not intend to now. Davin looked at the result. Then at me. 62%, he said. 62 is more than 0, I said. He held my gaze for a moment. Yes, he said, it is. He closed the simulation. Nobody in the room said anything for a few seconds. Then Oren said, quietly, not to me, not quite to anyone, just said, cash and cycle. Like he was filing it. Davin assigned reading for the next session. He listed 3 tactical documents I had not seen before. He said, at the end of the list, that he would be submitting a request to the curriculum board to have Faction B's supply logistics included in the base scenario documentation going forward. He said it the way people say things they have already decided. I picked up my bag. At the door, Vel caught up to me and grabbed my arm. You knew, Vel said. Before the simulation ran, you already knew which one worked. Yes, I said. How certain were you? I thought about it honestly, the way I tried to think about everything. 80%, I said. And the other 20 was the reason I needed the simulation to run, I said. Vel stared at me, then made a sound that I had come to recognize as the Korathi equivalent of a laugh that had nowhere to go. We walked out. Behind us, in the tactics room, Davin was still looking at the tilted holographic map. He had not corrected the angle. The morning of the first cohort drill, Vel asked me if I had slept. I said yes, which was mostly true. 4 hours is sleep. It is not a full night, but the body does not require a full night to function. It requires enough, and 4 hours is enough, and I had learned the difference between enough and comfortable a long time before I had words for either. The drill was not a test in the way the conditioning trials had been a test. This was a performance. The High Council observers sat in the upper gallery of the Academy's amphitheater simulation ring, and the simulation ring was the largest enclosed space I had been in since arriving, and that included the intake bay. The floor of it was a surface that could render terrain. It did not do so yet. It was flat and pale and still. 1,700 cadets filled the tiered seating, every cohort, every species, every level from first-year intake to senior command track. The human unit was 10 people. 10, because that was how many had tested into simulation-eligible status after the conditioning trials and the preliminary academic reviews. The original 41 had become 20, and then 20 had become 10. And the 10 of us stood in the staging corridor outside the simulation floor, and I looked at the people I had been given without asking for them, and they looked at me because 3 days ago I had started being in charge, and no one had corrected it. Owen was there, 2 others from the conditioning cohort, 5 cadets I had spoken to rarely but had watched carefully, a cadet named Lena who was quiet in a different way than me, the quiet of someone conserving something, and who I had placed at the center of my plan because the center required a person who would not break when things looked worst, and Lena had that quality in the same way that stones have it. I looked at all 10 of them. I did not give a speech. I have never given a speech. The thing about speeches is that they prepare people for the version of the thing the speaker describes, and the thing that actually happens is always different, and preparation for the wrong version is a kind of unpreparation. I said, do it like home. It was 10 words or fewer, and all of them already knew what I meant, and none of the alien cadets in the surrounding staging areas did. And that distance between the 2 groups of people was the entire strategy. The drill format was simple in description and not simple in execution. 2 units, a defined objective at the center of the simulation floor. The opposing unit reaches it first or holds it for 3 consecutive minutes to win. Our opposing unit was the top senior cohort, Velthari, undefeated in 6 full cycles. Their commander was a cadet named Reth, whom I had watched from the viewing area during their last demonstration exercise and filed under. Very good, very trained, very used to winning in ways that were clean and recordable. That last part was relevant. The simulation floor activated, terrain generated, low hills on two sides, a flat approach corridor from our staging point, a choke structure around the objective site that Reth's unit would use to control the approaches. The terrain was weighted toward the defending team, which was Reth's unit. They had better ground, better numbers, 6 cycles of undefeated record behind them. The signal sounded. Reth's unit moved out with the textbook precision I expected, a thing that had been beautiful to watch from the gallery. Coordinated, every cadet knowing their position before they took it. They moved toward the high ground around the objective like water following a slope it had already memorized. The human unit went a different direction. Not the direction the terrain suggested, not the direction the tactical overview would recommend. The direction that looked from the gallery like a mistake, like we had misread the map. Vel, watching from the cadet seating, told me later that the first sound from the crowd happened when we went left. The sound, as Vel described it, was the collective equivalent of people watching someone step off a curb without looking. We went left. We went into the low ground on the western edge of the simulation floor, where the terrain was rough, and the sightlines were bad, and the overhead cover was the thin kind that discouraged rather than protected. Reth's unit reached the high ground around the objective and set up, correctly, efficiently. 3 cadets on the forward face, 2 on the flanks, Reth at the command position with full sightline control. They looked at the corridor we had come from and found it empty. They looked at the left side. They found nothing, because we were deep enough in the low ground that we weren't visible, and we had stopped moving. This was the hardest part of what I had asked for. Stop moving. Do not communicate. Wait. The 10 of us lay in the low ground terrain of the simulation floor and did not move and did not speak, and I watched Lena from 3 meters away to confirm she was holding, and she was, her face calm in the way that stones are calm. And I looked at the others, and they were holding too. 40 seconds. Reth's unit held position. Then I could see from my angle they began to shift, not dramatically, small adjustments. The forward cade pulled back 1 step. One of the flank positions extended slightly outward. They were searching. In the gallery, Thas sat beside another senior instructor. Vel told me later that Thas had said nothing for the first 90 seconds of the drill. Just watched. His secondary limbs were still in the posture that Vel had come to recognize as Thas operating at full attention. 2 minutes in, Reth made a command decision. It was the right decision by every standard he had been trained with. He sent 2 cadets into the left side low ground to locate us. A search pattern, efficient, well executed. They found Owen. This was planned. Owen was the marker. His job was to be found, and then to run in the specific direction we had discussed, which was back toward the staging area and not toward the objective, because running toward the objective was what a unit retreating under pressure did, and we were not doing that. We were doing something that would look like retreating under pressure but was not. Owen ran. The 2 searching cadets pursued. Standard response. Reth watched his 2 cadet search team pursue 1 visible human toward the staging corridor and processed what he was seeing. From his command position, it looked like his unit had fractured our approach and we were falling back. He began moving the main unit toward the objective to consolidate the win. The remaining 8 of us came out of the low ground from the western face, which was the face that Reth's unit had their backs to. Not running. Moving at the pace that does not sound like running until it is already close, the pace I had learned at home when the distance mattered more than the speed. We reached the objective. Lena went to the control point first, her hands on the sensor panel. 3 minutes. 3 consecutive minutes was all we needed. Reth's unit turned. The response was fast. They were very good and they were fast, and if we had been where they expected us, the response would have been fast enough. But we were where they did not expect us, and the distance they had to cover to get back to the objective was the distance their forward movement had opened up. And the math of that was not in their favor. 1 minute. Reth pulled his unit into a perimeter around the objective and began the approach that would dislodge us. Coordinated. Correct. If I had been facing a different unit, a unit that held ground the way trained cadets hold ground, this approach would have worked. Lena stepped back from the control point. The 8 of us moved away from the objective in 4 different directions. Not retreating, dispersing. And then we stopped again. The simulation tracked control of the objective by the unit with the most cadets in contact with the sensor panel. Reth's unit moved in to retake it. They reached the panel. Control transferred back. 30 seconds elapsed. I came back to the panel from the east, Lena from the west, Owen, who had circled back after leading the search team halfway to the staging area, from the north. Control transferred again. Reth's unit was spread across the simulation floor in their response formation. Pulling back to the objective from a dispersed position takes time. The time it took them was the time we needed. 3 minutes. The signal sounded. The simulation floor went still. I stood by the control panel, Lena next to me, Owen coming in from the north, the rest of the unit emerging from the terrain they had used. The amphitheater was quiet. Not the beginning of a reaction, just quiet. The kind that comes before something that the crowd has not fully processed arrives at the surface. I became aware of the sound gradually. Someone retying their boot. Me, I was retying my boot. I stood up and the amphitheater was still quiet, and I looked at the High Council gallery, because it was the most visible structure in the room, and my eyes went to visible structures by habit. The observers were still. All of them. Thas was in the lower ring. His secondary limbs had unfolded from the resting position, both of them, in a posture I had not seen before. His 5 eyes were on me. In the cadet seating, 1,700 cadets were not making sounds. Reth stood at the center of the simulation floor, with the expression of someone whose model of the world had just been handed back to them, with a note that said several things were incorrect. I hope my face is not doing anything complicated. I thought noted. I thought about a house where silence was survival, and a water container at 1.3 gravity, and a photograph face down in a bag pocket, and a boot knot I had corrected on the 9th day of intake, and had been getting right every morning since. I thought about home. The amphitheater stayed quiet. Somewhere in the upper gallery, one of the High Council observers leaned toward another and said something in the old Velthari register. Vel told me later what the translator had made of it. What did we let in? I did not hear it in the moment. I found my unit and we walked off the simulation floor, and I told them they had done well, which was all there was to say, because they had, and anything more than that would have been adding something to a sentence that had already finished. Owen nodded. Lena said nothing. Right, I thought. We went to get dinner. The ceremony hall was not designed for discomfort. Everything in it was intended to communicate stability, history, and the accumulated confidence of an institution that had been right about enough things long enough to build furniture about it. The chairs were correct. The lighting was correct. The proportion of the room was correct in the way that rooms are correct when the people who built them understood that a room is a kind of argument. The argument this room was making was, we have always known what we were doing. I sat in the 3rd chair of the front row of the human cadet unit. Formal posture. Dress uniform, which in our case was the academy standard with the human integration patch on the left shoulder, a small detail that I had looked at once and then stopped looking at because it was a political detail, and the politics had already been decided without my input. Senior Arbiter Veltine stood at the ceremonial platform. He was the oldest Velthari I had seen in person. The exoskeleton had gone past gray into something closer to the color of old bone, dense and settled, and he moved with the precision of a person who had learned long ago that he could not move quickly, so he had made stillness and deliberateness into a style that looked like authority because it was. He had been doing this a long time. Commendation ceremonies, integration assessments, the official version of events, shaped and delivered with the weight of the institution behind every word. He was very good at it. The first human cadet cohort, he said, has completed its inaugural term at the Velthari Interstellar Academy. The results of this integration initiative have been assessed by the Academic Council and submitted to the High Council of Velthari for formal review. He paused in the way of someone who pauses because the weight of what follows requires space before it. The human cadet unit has demonstrated capability that was not anticipated in the initial integration projections. The Council commends this performance as a significant contribution to Academy culture. Unexpected contributor. Creative application of unconventional methodology. Valuable addition to Academy culture. I heard the boxes being built. Each phrase was a frame. The frames were not insulting. They were worse than insulting, because insulting would have meant someone was paying attention in a way that required a reaction. The frames were the thing institutions do when something has happened that they want to categorize before it categorizes them. You find the language that makes you the one doing the containing, and you say it formally and early and in a room with good chairs. I looked at the commendation medal in my hand. The face of it was ceremonial. A Velthari design, old symbol, the Academy crest rendered in a metal I did not know the name of. Probably expensive in the way that things are expensive when they are symbols rather than tools. The clasp on the back was interesting. It was a two-piece locking mechanism, spring-loaded, with a secondary safety catch that was unnecessary for its function, but which had been included anyway. And I wondered if the person who designed it had been the kind of person who added the secondary catch because they wanted to be certain, or because they did not trust the first catch, or because they simply found it more interesting with two catches than with one. I found it more interesting with two catches. I was looking at the secondary catch when Veltine said my name. Cadet Nara. I looked up. He was looking at me with the formal attention of someone addressing the room through a single point of contact. His 5 eyes were arranged in the pattern I had come to read as full focus, all attention, nothing divided. On behalf of the High Council and the Academy, he said, I would like to address you directly. A pause. You are the cadet of record for the first cohort drill outcome. You are also the cadet whose performance in the conditioning trials and tactical assessment has been most frequently cited in the Council's review documentation. He paused again. I waited. For the historical record, he said, and the phrase told me what was coming before the sentence arrived, the formal record, the frame, the box. What would you say is Earth's greatest asset, militarily, culturally, as a species preparing for full galactic integration? He expected something. I could see it, the slight forward arrangement of his primary limbs, the way his secondary limbs had settled in the at-ease position of someone ready to receive a statement they have already filed a slot for. He had a slot ready, something about resilience, probably, adaptability, something that could be cited and archived and appended to the integration initiative documentation as evidence that humans were grateful and appropriately aware of how much the Academy had offered them. I thought about my father. Not at length. Not with any of the weight the thought usually carried when I allowed it more than a moment, just the fact of him. The specific fact of a man who knew when to be loud and chose not to be, who understood that silence was not the absence of strength, who was gone now in a way that had not been clean or reasonable or fair, and whose absence I carried the way I carried the water processing tablets, not because I needed to check them every day, but because their weight was familiar, and familiar weight is a kind of company. I thought about the borderlands. I thought about 700 years of Earth history compressed into half a lecture, the pre-contact consolidation period, the clean phrase for the ugly thing. I thought about the intake bay, the word freight, the 17 cadets who laughed, and how long it took them to stop. I looked at Veltine. "We don't stop," I said. The room was quiet, good quiet. The room was designed for this kind of delivery, and it received the words cleanly. "Other species stop for reasons," I said. "Good reasons, pain, exhaustion, the numbers getting too bad to ignore, rational reasons. We have those responses too. We just also have this other thing that doesn't really have a name but which makes us keep going after the rational case for stopping has been made and accepted." I paused. Not for effect, because I was looking for the right word and I did not have it yet. "We break in ways that look like stopping," I said, "and then we don't stop." The room held this. Veltine's expression was the expression of someone who had received something in the slot they prepared and found that it did not fit the slot because it was a different shape than expected, but who had not yet decided whether to enlarge the slot or acknowledge that the shape was what it was. "You let us in because it was useful," I said. "Politically, I understand that." I said it without anything in it that was not true. No edge, no performance. The flat tone of someone reporting an accurate assessment of a situation. My voice in briefings. My voice when the gravity at home was 1.3 standard and the water container was full, and the distance to the collection point was the distance it always was. "But the documentation you're working from is old," I said. "The projections, the integration models, the files on human physical and tactical capability. They were built from observation of a population in one specific context over a limited period. That context was selected." I looked at him. "We were not performing at full range during the period you were watching. We were trying not to attract attention." Veltine was still. "Not in the way of someone who has been offended. In the way of someone who has been presented with a structural problem and is sitting with the structure of it." "The drill," he said. "Not a question, not quite." "The drill was the easy version," I said. A very long pause. "The easy version," Veltine said. "The opposition knew we were there," I said. "We were announced, assigned, time and place agreed upon in advance. A lot of the variables that make a real engagement hard were removed." Oren was somewhere in the senior cadet section. I was not looking at him, but I was aware of him the way I was aware of the positions of things in my peripheral vision, which was constant and not a choice. "What you saw in the drill," I said, "was what 10 human cadets who have been here for a single term can do with a defined problem and a controlled environment, and a team of people who trust each other." I held Veltine's gaze. "That is not the ceiling," I said. The ceremony hall held this the way good rooms hold difficult truths, without rushing, without flinching, just holding it. Veltine looked at me for a long time. I could not read his expression. I was honest with myself about this. His expressions were still partly opaque to me, the way language is partly opaque even when you have a translator. The translator gives you the words. It does not give you everything. But the stillness I could read. The stillness was the stillness of a man who had given many commendation ceremonies, and who had never, in any of them, arrived at this particular destination. Who had prepared, as he always prepared, for the version of the conversation that ceremonies produce, and who had found instead the version that actual things produce. He was not angry. I was fairly certain he was not angry. He was doing the calculation that Thos had begun doing after the conditioning trials, and that Davin had begun doing after the tactics seminar, and that Oren was still in the middle of. The calculation that begins when a model meets data that the model did not predict, and the person running the model is honest enough to revise the model rather than discount the data. It took a long time. Then he turned to the record keeper beside him and said something in the old Velthari register, low and precise. The translator did not render it. Some things in old Velthari the translator had standing instructions not to render in public record, official proceedings, or formal ceremonies. I watched him say it. Then he turned back to the room and completed the ceremony. The formal close, correct. Every phrase landed in its place. The commendations were distributed. The human cadet unit was released to the general reception. Music in the Velthari frequency played from somewhere above us. Vel appeared immediately. "What did you say to him?" Vel said. "I answered his question," I said. "He looked like you handed him a water container and told him the collection point had moved." "That's probably accurate," I said. Vel stared at me, then looked at the commendation medal still in my hand, then at the clasp on the back, which I had gone back to examining. "Are you looking at the clasp?" Vel said. "The secondary catch is unnecessary," I said, "but I think I understand why they included it." Vel made the sound that had no direct translation, but which I had come to understand. Meant that Vel was experiencing something that was partly exasperation and partly something warmer. Oren arrived. He did not appear from anywhere specific. He was simply at my right side when I became aware of him, which was unusual because I was generally aware of where people were. He had moved quietly. I noted this. We walked away from the main ceremony cluster into the corridor that connected the hall to the senior academic wing. The three of us, without discussing it, found a pace that matched and held it. Oren said, "The files are old." Not a question. Repeating it. The way you repeat something when you are still processing whether it means what it sounds like it means. "Yes," I said. He said, "How old?" I thought about this for half a corridor. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer, so I tried to give it one, which meant sitting with it rather than answering fast. "Old enough," I said, "that you've been modeling us against a version of ourselves that had reasons to seem smaller than we are." Oren walked. Vel walked. I walked. The corridor was long in the way of academy corridors, built for beings that covered ground differently than I did, with ceiling height and door proportions calibrated for Velthari physiology. I had stopped noticing this the way you stop noticing the weight of a thing you carry every day. "The borderlands," Oren said. "Yes," I said. "The gravity." "And other things," I said. "The gravity is the easy part to explain." He was quiet for a moment. "What's the hard part to explain?" he asked. I thought about the photograph face down in my bag. I thought about the silence of a house where being quiet was the smartest thing you could be. I thought about collecting water at 11 years old and the specific calculation of exactly how far you could carry a full container before the load became a liability rather than a resource. The hard part to explain was that none of it was training. It was just what happened when a species lived a long time in conditions that required a specific kind of answer to survive them, and that species was very, very good at surviving. "It's hard to explain," I said, to someone who didn't live in it. Oren accepted this. We reached the junction where the corridor split, senior cadet wing to the right, the rest of the academy to the left. "Your unit," Oren said, "in the drill." He paused. "They followed a plan that put some of them in a position they knew was bad." "Yes," I said. "They didn't break." "No," I said. "Why not?" I thought about Lena, about the quality she had that Stones had, about Owen's nod in the corridor after the conditioning trials, not amazed, not congratulatory, just the nod of someone who had filed a thing where it belonged. "Because they knew it mattered," I said, "and because they trusted that I had a reason." "Did you?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And if the reason had been wrong?" I looked at him. "Then I would have been wrong," I said, "and we would have lost the drill instead of won it, and I would have known exactly what to correct." Oren stood at the corridor junction. His expression was the one I had been watching develop over the past weeks. The one that started after the conditioning trials and clarified after the tactics seminar and arrived fully after the drill. The expression of someone who has revised their model enough times that they have stopped being surprised by the revision and started being interested in what the next one will show them. He said, "The High Council is opening a new file." "I know," I said. "They're afraid," he said, not accusing. "Observing." "Yes," I said. "Are you?" I thought about the question honestly, the way I had thought about Vel's question on the sixth day. Fear as a logistics problem, requiring accurate inventory before you could assess it. "No," I said. Oren looked at me for a moment. "Because you already knew," he said, "what you are." "Because I already knew," I said, "what we've been waiting to be." The difference between those two sentences was the thing I could not explain in this corridor with the time we had, and I knew it, and I let the gap between them sit open instead of filling it with something smaller than the truth. Oren nodded once, the same nod Owen had given me in the conditioning corridor, not amazed, not congratulatory. The nod of a person who has just revised their model and found the new version accurate. He went right. Vel and I went left. We walked for a while in the good kind of silence, the kind that does not need to be filled because it is already full. "What did Veltine say to the record keeper?" Vel asked, in Old Velthari. "I don't know," I said. "The translator didn't render it." "I could find out," Vel said. "I have contacts in the administrative cohort. Old Velthari is a narrow field. Someone would know." I thought about it. "No," I said. "You don't want to know." I thought about this too. "Whatever he said," I said, "it's already in the file, and whatever is in the file is the beginning of the next conversation, not the last word of this one." Vel walked beside me. "The next conversation," Vel said. "Yes," I said. "With the High Council." "Probably," I said. "About what Earth actually is." "About what Earth has always been," I said. "They just haven't had the right files." We reached the meal hall. The reception crowd had spilled from the ceremony hall into the adjacent corridors, and the meal hall had been converted to the kind of event space that featured small food items on flat surfaces and cadets from 17 species, standing in configurations that approximated conversation. I got a plate. I found a position near the wall with a clear sightline to the room and ate. Across the room, through the crowd, I saw Thus. He was not in a conversation. He was standing the way he had stood in the conditioning hall, with the quality of stillness that was not rest but attention, and he was looking at the room with 4 of his 5 eyes. The 5th eye was looking at me. I met it. He held the look for a moment. Then he made a motion with one of his primary limbs, small, precise, not a gesture I had a word for, not a salute, not a nod, something that existed between acknowledgement and a question about what comes next, rendered in a language older than the translator could reach. I held my plate. I nodded. He looked away. Somewhere, in a wing of the academy I had not been to yet, a file was being opened with a working title that Vel had described to me later, the translation imperfect, something that meant re-evaluation of what we thought we knew. They were asking the right question. Finally, Earth had been answering it for a long time, quietly, in the way of things that do not announce what they are until the moment the announcement is the last formality before the answer is already obvious. I finished my plate. I retied my boot. I looked at the room. 41 humans had walked into the intake bay with their packs and their bootlaces and their photographs face down in their bags and their water tablets and their borderland gravity and their 700 years of pre-contact consolidation history. 10 of them had stood on a simulation floor in front of 1,700 witnesses and done something that nobody had predicted. And that had been the easy version. The room did not know that yet. It would. I put my plate down and found Vel and Owen and Lena, and we went back to the dormitory wing, and I sat on my bunk and took the photograph out of my bag. I looked at it this time, just for a moment. Then I put it away. Right, I thought. The next thing,